Well, so we are now recording, and I'm just going to begin our time together. Let's start with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks that you open our hearts and our minds and our very lives to your presence, to your word. Allow us to better understand the gift of your Son as he continues to teach us, lead us, guide us, and love us every single day of our journey of life and faith. And Lord, lift us all up that we may be able to hear and know your call. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen with you.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. That way I can keep looking at my notes.
Yep.
So the whole point of tonight is to kind of cover the world the disciples and Jesus were in. That gives a little bit of background information. It also kind of provides some insight on their mentality when they saw the Messiah and what they're expecting and believe. So for the first slide, or the next slide, this is Israel from the King David that we all know from the Bible. So David and Goliath. He was in King Saul's court playing the harp way back in the day. And then his son, King Solomon, from I cannot say her name, Pastor.
Bathsheba?
Thank you. Yes, same King David, who saw her, fell in love, had her husband killed. Her first son, or the son from that union, died after 7 days, but the second son, Solomon, became king after. This, to the Jews of that time period, this was the golden era. Saul, David, and Solomon. Their golden era, the greatest time, because they had a kingdom. King Solomon, David's son, built the first temple to God, Solomon's temple. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. This is where, right? Yeah. Where it's kept, where God was said to be in his house, in Israel, in the kingdom of God. Unfortunately, King Solomon's son, the very first thing he did when he kind of took power was the citizens asked him to lower taxes. He asked his elders and advisors what he should do, and they said, lower it to earn the respect of the people. He ignored them, asked his best friends, and they said, raise taxes. He raised taxes, and there was a rebellion. The kingdom of Israel split. You had 10 tribes become the northern kingdom of Israel, and then the lower kingdom of Judah, which is the house of Judah and Benjamin under Rathsub, so King Solomon's son. And they kind of bickered and warred for the next couple hundred years. They were also besieged on all sides. The northern kingdom was stronger because obviously 10 tribes versus 2. So Judah fell under as a colony of Egypt. It was attacked by the Assyrians. All sorts of problems until 586 BC, Babylon took over. That's the kingdom of Babylonia. That is the Babylon of the Bible that's evil, Antichrist. Most likely because once they took over, they exiled the Jews. They burnt down the Temple of Solomon, took all of his all the possessions, and took it back to Babylon. It was, at this point, the darkest time in the Jewish history. Then the Persians took over, and that's King Cyrus. Actually, if you ever want to look it up in the Bible, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and then the books of Kings all covered this history through to Persia. With the Persians, the Jews were allowed to return. They were allowed to rebuild a temple. And the first king King Cyrus returned all of the possessions the Babylonians had stolen. So the Persian Empire was seen as kind of a better time for the Jews until in 332 BC, Alexander the Great conquered the Persians, and he established his own kingdom. It wasn't Alexander the Great brought a lot of innovation, but also the Greek influence. The fact that the disciples had Greek names and Hebrew names comes from that time period. After Alexander the Great died, his sons tried to split up the kingdom, and unfortunately, Israel kind of sat as a battleground between two of them. I can't pronounce either names, but at some point I'll try to get the spelling out if y'all want to do more research. It's the Seleucidians and the PT. I don't know. I cannot pronounce that. I've tried.
So the P is silent.
Oh, that explains a lot.
So, but yeah, it was just a warring state. And keep in mind, too, Israel is seen as a trade route in which everyone wanted the wealth because all of the wealth went through there from east to west, from north to south. This is where it had to come through. You couldn't go through the desert. Here there was at least food, water, and sustainable travel.
Yeah. In 200 BC, the Seleucids, one of the two Greek states, finally conquered Israel and outlawed the Jewish religion shortly after. And that's where the 167 BC, the Jews rebelled, leading to the establishment of an actual Jewish city-state again, or kingdom again. And then slowly over time, it fell to Rome. Some peaceful, some being sacked, depending on where. In 63 BC, it's considered the fall because that's when Jerusalem fell to the Romans, to a Roman siege. Nathan, you'll flip the next slide. Thank you, sir. The Roman occupation, obviously 63 BC. But when Rome took over in the ancient time, they kind of made a point of allowing the local magistrates or government to stay in power as long as they were paying the tribute to Rome. So Israel was treated more or less as its own little entity under a Jewish king-ish king, one that Rome approved. They also would bring technology, roads, aqueducts. I know that in The Chosen they kind of showed what the plans. So that was being set up. It would also help with trade along the highways, very similar to like the highways were built in America. If the city was on that trade route or on that road, it boomed. If it was off, it lost a lot of money, and kind of people would either leave or just survive. And then Nathan's already pointed out international trade because of where it was intersected. The final thing is the Romans started building their own colonies, their cities. Most of the time, it was where soldiers retired who were serving in the area. So even though they weren't technically soldiers anymore, they were still vets who could be called up in case of rebellion, insurrection, or problems. So there was a military influence. On the flip side, in Rome, there was also some political upheaval going on. So 63 BC, Rome takes over Jerusalem. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar becomes the first emperor of Rome, and then is killed by Brutus. 42, Julius Caesar's assassins are killed, and that's the final battle of the Roman Republic. That is the death of the democracy in Rome. In 31 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the famous ones, lose to Octavian, Julius Caesar's son, adopted son, but son, establishing Octavian as the first true emperor of Rome. By 27 BC, he's named first citizen and given the name of Augustus. As princeps is the Latin, but it's first citizen, so he is emperor and officially recognized. However, during that time period, he also had to put down any resurrections against that were trying to restore democracy. He had to conquer any generals that were trying to overthrow him, and he had to silence any all opposition. All that political turmoil was going on leading up to Christ's birth. And the Roman citizens and Roman soldiers in Jerusalem or in Israel would have been dealing with it and kind of keeping up to date on it and be divided. So not only were the Jews kind of pushing against the Romans were fighting each other. That's the kind of turmoil that would have been 30 years prior to Christ's birth. Next slide after that is the religion in that time period. So before Christ was born, we had that split of the Pharisees and Sadducees as seen in The Chosen, and as we know from the Bible. They were bickering, but kind of getting along, sort of. There were 615 biblical laws. We know a couple of them. That's the 10 Commandments, but it's also go through the book of Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and all the laws that were written into the Old Testament from, seventh day, do this. After giving birth, the woman was unclean for 7 days. Kid had to be baptized, then she had to go 33 days before. Like, everything that they were following is in the Old Testament, and any and everything that's written there had to be done by the letter of the law. Unfortunately, because a lot of those teachings tied being unclean, being sick, being cursed, being poor, being any of those things are basically not well off, was seen as being sinful or being cursed by God. So wealthy people, blessed by God. Poor, no. You were struck with sickness, you were seen as being cursed by God and therefore should be shunned. That's where the Good Samaritan story comes from. That's where a lot of Christ's teachings would originate in this. Being poor or being unclean does not translate to sin. But all the disciples, all the Israelites believed they were God's chosen people. I mean, it's all over the Bible. They are God's chosen people, and that Israel is God's kingdom on earth. And the Messiah was going to show up and basically save Israel, was going to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth of Israel, of the Israelites, who are now under the Roman control, and so therefore are not their own kingdom. Every single one of the disciples would be thinking, someone's going to show up like King David did, and just military campaign, conquer everything, build an army. Next slide. I don't have any. That's cool. So, education in the old times. In 63 BC, right around the time that Rome took over, but not Roman in origin, there was a free school mandate where it was basically the king of Israel at the time decided that all children, elementary school children, should receive an education. But teachers weren't paid. It was supposed to fall on the cities, and obviously the cities that were doing well were more likely to be able to support it. Richer kids could get off from the farm or from their trade and craft to be sent to school. And what ended up happening was urban areas had more teachers, had more schools. The rules on a teacher to student was at max 25 kids per teacher. Above that, and there had to be an assistant. At 40, there had to be 2 teachers. So even if there was a small town like Bethlehem or Nazareth that had a teacher by chance, at max 25 kids per teacher. If you just happened to not, if there's 26, one of the kids just didn't get educated, they weren't allowed. It wasn't until
I'll I'll just remind you too, this is earlier on, this is only the boys that are going. So we're not talking the ladies. There was some education for the women, but it was mostly done by the mom, of how to keep a good home, how to take care of a family, and that kind of insight. So when we're talking about a school, we're really talking about 25 boys. So I'll just remind.
Yeah, thanks. It didn't dawn on me that the male female wouldn't be understood. Basically, they taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it was very much learn how to read the Old Testament and the laws, learn how to write your name so you could sign contracts, and then the basic arithmetic of knowing how much you should pay or how much in change you should give somebody. It was very basic. It was also based on memorization. You would memorize parts of the Old Testament. You would memorize some of the laws. Then you had your own script that you were supposed to find, and it was your first name. The first letter of your first name started it. The first letter of your last name had to be the last word, the start of the last word in what have you learned. So for me, I'd have to find a part of the Bible that started with S, and the last word had to be in, or start with in. It didn't matter how long, but you had to memorize it, and that was proof that you passed elementary school. Now, because it wasn't a paid position, teachers were expected to be full craftsmen and to keep a job. That meant that it typically fell to priests, A, because they were educated, and B, because their job was easy. Well, it kind of coincided. That's Nathan there. No. It started as priests. However, over time, the priest positions were kind of creeping in, and they needed to figure out different teachers. That's where the rise of the scribes came from. Scribes were the lawyers, the doctors, the notaries, secretaries, even back then were considered of a higher status than we kind of think of now. And the scribes came to power as a result. They weren't as powerful as the priests, but they were more secular recognized. And that's why when we kind of look at Christ, who's a teacher, it's the scribes are his number one enemy, and then you've got the priests, and then you've got the Romans who are kind of looking at all of it over top and going, what's going on? Like, he's not rebelling against us. The scribes see him as upsetting the order of things, and the priests see him as teaching directly against them and a lot of their teachings. So that's why it's more of a Jewish problem, and the Romans kind of take a little bit more of a back seat. And then next slide. So for Jesus' childhood, or just kind of following Jesus, first off, he is a descendant of King David through his father, or earthly father, Joseph. But anyone, that's why a couple of the Matthew and Luke both point out he's an heir to the throne of Israel, down to King David. He was born in Bethlehem, as we know, and then, as we know from the book and then from Chosen, he spent time in Egypt. Quite a few years until King Herod passed away. A couple other points that we can tell from it is that his parents every year took him to Jerusalem for the Passover. But he was in Nazareth, and Jerusalem is a 4-day travel. It's 64 miles. It's actually the distance from here to Weatherford. Yes, I looked it up in a Google map directly. It's a 4-day travel there, 4-day travel back. It's 2 weeks out of the year that Joseph had to be wealthy enough to be able to walk away from his craft. So by all indications, Jesus was either like an upper, lower class or somewhere in that middle class range. So he's not dirt poor for Nazareth, but he's not super rich growing up. Especially considering Nazareth would have been a smaller city. So if he was in Jerusalem, he probably would have been, or what is it when your income's based off of, or not income based? I cannot think. How much money you're making changes what your income or your status in a certain area.
Oh,
I
I want to
just
say a caste system, but that's not right. I can't think of what the term is.
does anyone have an idea or know what the word is?
Hey, that's okay then. We'll just move on.
Perfect. Yeah. So the fact that that Joseph was able to travel for 2 weeks indicates that at least in Nazareth he was well off or better off.
And I'll just chime in here for 1 second. Keep in mind that going to Jerusalem and that kind of time period of Passover and what we would say is Easter has much of the same importance of our modern day Easter and Christmas combined. So it's one of those things that if you wanted something, you would save up for it. And this was such a big deal that you might even go a little bit into debt in order to celebrate with family and friends and as a community. And even too, there would be a pooling of resources. So there would be ways to make it happen. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Nathan. So Jesus' childhood, and when he's traveling, he would have stayed as a carpenter, as a teacher. So he still would have been doing carpentry everywhere we went and selling it to kind of at least keep up that understanding that a teacher should have a craft. But he's not a scribe. He's not part of that upper class where people would expect him to be a preacher or a teacher of that time period. That ends everything on the crash course, Jesus' time period and Jesus' childhood. If you do get a chance or you want to take the time, look at a couple of the accounts of where Jesus stays at the temple. I know that was in the Chosen episode that I've now almost caught up on. And a lot of those early things are in the Bible. But otherwise, from a 12 Ordinary Men book standpoint, it concentrates more on the time that Christ first calls them through to Christ's ascension into heaven. It's more of an interesting thing to look at Christ's childhood to get a little bit more insight, and can show a little bit more insight into that time period, but not necessary. The final slide is kind of the schedule that I'm thinking we run off of. You want to jump to the next one, Nathan?
Well, I was going to say, should we pause here and ask for questions?
We can.
So I'm just going to go around the circle here and say, does anyone have any questions about any of this or any thoughts of like, I didn't know this, that you wouldn't mind sharing with others? And if you don't have anything at all, you can just either say pass or not right now, and just let me know. I'm going to start with Karen and Judy, and we'll start with Miss Karen. Oh.
Okay. My thoughts on this? Mm-hmm.
Any questions, or if you had something that was, oh yeah, I'm just
kind of glad to be in this because a lot of this I don't remember. I probably at some point have heard some of this, but it's been a long time. So I find this kind of interesting. I really do. Because I used to think that was so boring to look back on all those times. So I didn't always read that part of the Bible very well.
Sure.
But I think this is good.
Well, great. Well, we're glad you're here too. Judy?
So do we know, it doesn't talk about Joseph that much in the Bible. Do we know what happened? I mean, we know Mary was still around, Jesus's mother, but Joseph.
Yep.
It's like he's there and then he's not.
So this isn't recorded in scripture, but it's kind of, I'll say, information that's out there that Joseph would have been around for the early days of Jesus's life, but probably when he was a young boy, probably around 12 to 15, somewhere in there, Joseph died, is kind of the idea. And so we don't hear about him because he's no longer with Jesus.
Okay.
But yeah, there's not an exact reference as to, well, on his 9th birthday or something like that.
No, I just, yeah.
I would just think actually that Joseph would have died a little bit later, because Christ was a carpenter, and wouldn't have started really an apprenticeship until 10 or 11.
He wouldn't have started an apprenticeship, but that's where there's some question about how old was he? Because anywhere between 12 to 15, Jesus would have become a man, basically. He would have had his bar mitzvah, and he would have been able to go off on his own, whether that's staying at home to study apprenticeship with carpentry, or go find someone else to then apprentice under. So that's why I gave those kind of range of 12 to 15, I guess.
Makes sense. I'm good.
Okay.
So, good question. Anything else?
Now I have to go back now into some of these books of the Bible. I didn't realize there were that many laws. I'm like, oh my God, 615 laws. Help me.
So actually, if it helps, the 10 Commandments.
Right.
Then look at Deuteronomy 12 through 20.
Hold on. Deuteronomy 12 through 20.
I was going to say.
No, I wrote them down. I just didn't read the chapter. Okay.
And then Leviticus and Numbers. Leviticus and Numbers are more tied to the codes of holiness for priests.
Okay.
But they still do apply. Yeah, it's. I mean, even just looking at or going to Deuteronomy and starting at 12, there's one place of worship, worshiping other gods, clean and unclean foods, tithes, the year for canceling debts, freeing servants, firstborn animals, and just keep going. Like, I have the subtitles that are just saying, here's what this law is.
Okay.
And it's very, very thorough, to the point that, like, freeing a servant. I'm not going to go into expect deals. After 7 years, they're free. If they had a wife when they became a servant, the wife and the children are free.
Yep.
If the master gave the servant a wife, she and the children stay with the master, and the servant's released. If the servant wants to stay with his wife and kids, he then becomes a servant for life. I mean, it's just...
It's very detailed and very clear.
So I guess my question is, we got the 10 Commandments, and that was kind of to corral the people and give them rules, basically.
Yep.
So why did we get so many? I mean, why is it like people went crazy?
I would think it's kind of like the Bill of Rights, to expand out to all the little nuances that we now have of, well, what does this actually mean in a day-to-day life?
I'll say yes in some regards. It's an expansion of that. There's a lot of them there that have to deal more so with a time and place. Many of them are for, I'll say, dietary laws, or they are how it is you're living your life in the manner of clothes that you can wear. So, for example, a cheeseburger you really shouldn't eat because it would break your kosher laws. You can't have dairy and the meat together because they're from the same animal.
Gotcha.
Later on, doctors have now discovered that, hey, where do you get a lot of your cholesterol and some of your problems when you eat? Hey, it's from some of those same dietary laws would actually help you with that. Some of them was, I'll say, circumstantial, where if you lived inland, and that one of the laws is you should not eat shellfish, because by the time it got out of the ocean, made the journey to your market and then to your plate, it would not be good to eat anymore. And by and large, a lot of the laws were for the community, were for the people.
Right.
Okay.
And so some of them were, I'll say, very detailed just to have it clear and cut. And again, we're mostly educated, but not to the point where everyone can read, write, or do everything they need to. So
Okay.
I guess all of those factors kind of come together with the reason for the laws.
Okay. Interesting.
So anything else from you two? Otherwise, we're going to bounce around to some others.
Bounce around all you want.
All right. We'll bounce along. Let's go to Miss Teresa.
So back to the laws thing, if the laws were, so the people on the coast, did they have to follow the shellfish laws, and did they all? So they didn't eat shellfish either.
Correct.
Okay.
So this is also where you're going to get what is a clean animal and an unclean animal. Of a pig is considered an uncleaned animal. And really one of the main determiners is the hoof, how it's cut. If you've ever, sorry, yes?
It's actually a combination. It has to have a cleft foot.
Yep.
And eat the cud, so grass. If it did one, or if it had one or the other, it was not considered clean.
Correct.
I didn't understand what he said.
Oh, can you say it again, Scott?
So the cleft foot that Nathan was talking about, plus eating grass.
Okay.
It's called the cud. And that's just, grass or hay.
Okay.
It had to have both, or do both. If it was one or the other, it was not clean.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Nathan, you might be able to answer this. The pig restriction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm told, or I was in research, found out that it's from Egypt to differentiate them from the Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so there's a couple of different factors there. One, in their time of Egypt, that was part of it, but also pigs are willing to eat pretty much anything. And so because they're willing to eat what is also unclean, it is seen that they would defile themselves by eating some of that. So,
Okay, that makes
yes. If we want to, we could do a whole class on the dietary laws of the Old Testament. So, anything else, Miss Teresa?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Let's go to Lorraine.
So I don't have any questions, but I do want to say I am a big fan of timelines. And Scott, you did a great job laying that out. Made it so very easy to understand, and I felt like I was there going through those time periods. Thank you so much.
And thank you. And then let's go to Susan and Dave.
You have any questions, Dave?
No, I think I'm all right.
I do
Okay.
have a question / comment. Okay,
Sure.
Jesus was supposed to have gone to Jerusalem when he was 12. That's when he got left behind. Is that right?
Yes.
Mhm.
So that means that Joseph was still alive at that point. And I've also was wondering, because you mentioned that they always went back to Jerusalem. Did they do that when they were living in Egypt too? Or was that just
No.
once they moved to Nazareth?
No, that was Nazareth.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. Okay. But
Yep.
they went all the time after that. All right. Good. That's all I had a question about.
Very good. Well, that was easy. Well, we have one more person. Mr. Kimball.
I too want to make a comment about the timeline. It really helps context, but I want to say that if we're going to do timelines, we need to have about 30 minutes or more on each bullet point so we can dive into it. Because I was having stuff popping up in my head at every comment you made. I know that educating females is still relatively recent in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Women's rights is relatively recent in the world. And I know that the elite of history, the males, had education.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew that there was that early instituted, quote unquote, mandatory education. That's, to me, that kind of is a disconnect because I see the people in power wanting to keep the people stupid because they're easier to control. And this just didn't make sense. But be that as it may, Rome built up and was great, and then it deteriorated.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times have we seen that happen in the world? So anyway, you're doing a good job. Thank you.
Yeah, the only reason I didn't go into a deeper talk on that timeline is we probably could do a whole Bible study on the time from Saul all the way up to Jesus' birth. And I don't know enough of it. It would be going back to Nathan and going, please help, or please do.
And it was also how long did you guys want to be here? Or how many weeks did we want to cover this too?
But I mean, before y'all got on, I kind of mentioned to Nathan that when I actually first started looking back over this, I knew about King David and Solomon. I didn't realize that some of the later books in the Old Testament had mentions of the Persian and the Babylonian conquests.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, those reads were really fascinating for me to cover over again. Because, not going into too much detail, but Ezra covers the Persian.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, Chronicles kind of mentions the Babylonians, and then like Esther is how a Jewish woman became the queen of Persia with Xerxes, the guy from the Spartan 300 movie. Yeah, same king. All this is happening. So Xerxes, Julius Caesar, all of this is going on right around this time period, and that connection when it first happened, the first time I read 12 Ordinary Men, blew me away. Because I had studied Rome in my Latin classes. I had studied the Bible, obviously, Sunday school, etc., and then all the way through to 12 Ordinary Men. And then I actually had a Greek class in college where I covered the Spartans and Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Kimball, Athens and the Romans both had forms of education.
Mm-hmm.
The Greeks were more of a let's go to the main centers and just have somebody talking like Socrates, Aristotle, and they were just kind of rambling on teachers. The Romans had a little bit a better system, but it was very class-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Upper class had the private, then kind of a merchant class could kind of get what we would think of colleges today with 200, or freshman classes today with 200 students to one teacher. And the poor just, no. But that's also, there's the citizens versus not. I mean, Rome is a weird society in and of itself. And on what they had for caste system, social status, you could have wealthy citizens, like the kings of Israel would have had a higher status than a Roman citizen. And as long as he was acting in the king's state, the moment they were both kind of just acting as citizens, then the Roman may be dependent. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think Chosen did a really good job of showing that, where the Pharisees were like, the Pharisees are given respect, but they're also expected to follow the praetors, and that's that actually was a really impressive that they were able to figure that out and follow it. It shows the research they put in.
Yeah.
Even with the creative licensing elsewhere.
So in all of this, we really wanted to just kind of highlight some of the information that you could then kind of digest as we went through and watched the television series, that first season. Then we were able to get that relationship connection between Jesus and the disciples. This kind of says what happened before Jesus and what is the society, what does the community look like around it? And then now let's go to that last slide of what's our schedule look like?
Oh, I forgot to write the parentheses. Sorry.
Oh,
So those are the actual pages that I was trying to keep track of so that I didn't go over too much, over 20. But for the first chapter, I think the book's in the other room. So chapter 1 is 27 pages, and I kind of broke that in half. The second chapter is about Peter. Again, that's super long. The only chapter I really couldn't find a good break for this longer was John at 22 pages.
So what we're going to do is I'll send an email out to invite everyone in there, and I'll include the schedule in there, so you don't need to be jotting it down right now. But that's kind of the game plan, is trying to keep it under 20 pages for you to read, so then that way we still have time to talk about that chapter or that section that we do read. That way we can keep it hopefully around an hour. We thought we had some books, but we discovered we don't have the books. So if you would like, go ahead and order it on Amazon or some other place that you would like to have it shipped to you. Most of the time when I've found it on Amazon, it's around $8, and it takes maybe a day or two to get to you. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you would like me to do that, send me an email, and then I'll get together an order, and then I'll have them up at the church that you can go in and pick it up. So let me know. I plan on putting the order in probably Sunday, just so that they'll get here by Monday or Tuesday. But then that doesn't leave you much time to read. But we'll figure that one out as we come to that first week. And if you know of others who would like to read it but haven't been a part of this, please let us know, and we can include them very easily. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing this. And I'm going to stop recording.